At dinner, as I was setting the table, John turned to me and said, "From now on, you sleep out in the garage." His words hit me like a slap across the face. I didn't say a word, I just nodded. "Fine," I replied, almost without thinking. I had spent the last 30 years of my life supporting this man, and now, after all that, he was kicking me out of our home. I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. The clinking of silverware on plates seemed louder than usual, but I didn't flinch. I knew I had no choice but to keep calm. The silence between us was deafening. John didn't look at me again after that. He just continued eating, as if everything was normal. I could feel my chest tightening, but I forced myself to breathe steadily, even though my mind was racing. I kept my eyes on my plate, not daring to look up. The dinner we'd shared for years, filled with small talks and laughter, now felt like a lifetime ago. I had spent so many years preparing his meals, keeping his life running smoothly, but this was the moment I realized I had become invisible to him. I could hardly believe it. I wondered if he even cared at all. He didn't. His words made that clear. He no longer saw me as his partner. He saw me as a burden. I could feel the tears threatening to well up in my eyes, but I swallowed them down. I had to stay strong. I had to keep my dignity. Later that night, after cleaning up the kitchen, I walked to the garage. I took my things slowly, one by one, and carried them outside. My hands were shaking, but I didn't let them show. I stood there for a moment, looking at the space that had once been our home, the place where I had given so much of myself. Now, I was being pushed out of it like a stranger. The garage smelled of dust and old cardboard, a stark contrast to the warmth and comfort of the house. But I didn't fight it. Not anymore. I was no longer his wife. I was someone he barely recognized. The reality of it hit me as I set up a bed in the corner of the garage. This was the new normal. I could hardly believe it, but there was nothing I could do about it. I had lived through so much for this family, but it felt like it was all falling apart. Yet, for some reason, I didn't feel defeated. I felt free. It was a strange thought, but it was there. Freedom had never seemed so distant, but now, in the quiet of that cold garage, I could almost touch it. I had to admit it. I was tired of fighting for someone who didn't care about me. I had spent too long pretending everything was fine, but not anymore. As I lay there in the dim light of the garage, I realized that I was done. Done with the silence. Done with the neglect. Done with being invisible. I had to make a change, and it started right here, right now. I had to find my way back to myself. I couldn't stay in this place forever, but for tonight, I would sleep in the garage. Tomorrow, things would be different. I was going to take back what was mine. I sat in the cold garage that night, listening to the distant hum of the refrigerator in the house. The house that had been our home for so many years now felt like a place I no longer belonged. I had lived there with John for 30 years, but tonight, the walls that had once held laughter and warmth now felt empty and foreign. I could hear the faint sound of his voice inside, muffled by the walls, but I didn't move. It was as if he didn't even realize I was gone. I tried to imagine what his life would be like without me. Would he even miss me? The thought made my stomach tighten, but I pushed it away. I had to focus on myself now. I had to figure out who I was outside of this marriage. I had spent so much time being his wife, his caretaker, his partner, but it seemed like none of that mattered anymore. I wasn't just his wife. I was a ghost to him. I thought about the years I had dedicated to making this house a home. I thought about the nights I had stayed up late, taking care of things he never noticed. I had cooked for him, cleaned for him, and made sure everything ran smoothly while he focused on his work. He had built his career, but I had built our life. But now, it felt like none of that mattered. The house was still the same, but everything had changed. As I lay there in the garage, I couldn't help but wonder when it all went wrong. Was it the years of silence? The moments when he would come home late, barely saying a word to me? The nights when I would lie in bed, waiting for him to come to me, but he never did? I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the woman he married anymore. I wasn't the woman who mattered to him. And that hurt. But in the silence of the garage, I also realized something else. I didn't need his approval to be happy. I didn't need his love to feel complete. I had spent so long depending on him for validation, for affection, but I didn't need that anymore. I could survive on my own. I could find happiness within myself. I wasn't just going to lie here and accept this. I wasn't going to sit idly by while he took everything from me. I was going to find my own way, no matter how long it took. The next morning, I woke up early, my body stiff from sleeping on the garage floor, but my mind was clearer than it had been in a long time. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I had to do something. I stood up, stretching my arms above my head, and walked back into the house. It felt strange, walking through the front door like I had every day for years, but this time it was different. I wasn't walking in as his wife. I wasn't walking in as someone who was expected to serve him. I was walking in as someone who was going to take control of her life. The house was quiet, and for a moment, I wondered if John was even still home. But then I heard him, his footsteps coming down the hall, and I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. I had to face him. I couldn't avoid it any longer. When he saw me standing there in the kitchen, he didn't say a word. He just stared at me, as if he couldn't believe I was still there. I could see the confusion in his eyes, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But I quickly pushed it aside. I had nothing to feel guilty for. I had given him everything, and he had taken it all for granted. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steady. He raised an eyebrow, but still didn't speak. "What's going on, Karen?" he asked, his tone cold. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts before I spoke. "I'm not going to stand by and let you treat me like this anymore," I said. "I've spent too many years putting your needs before mine, and I'm done." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You're being dramatic," he said, his voice dismissive. "You'll get over it." That was it. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. I had spent years trying to make him see me, to make him care, but it had all been for nothing. It was time to let go. I wasn't going to waste any more time hoping for something that would never come. "No, John," I said, my voice firm. "I'm done waiting. I'm done being invisible to you." His face softened for a moment, but it wasn't enough. I knew he wasn't going to change. He never had. And now, I had to change. I wasn't going to let him control my life any longer. I woke up the next morning with a sense of clarity, but it wasn't the kind of clarity I had hoped for. The house was silent, and for a brief moment, I almost convinced myself that everything was normal, that the night before had been some sort of bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was my new reality. I had spent too many years suppressing my feelings, too many years trying to keep the peace, but not anymore. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I walked through the house, the familiarity of it all almost overwhelming. The smell of coffee brewing, the sound of the refrigerator humming, everything was the same as it had been for the last 30 years. But nothing felt the same. I didn't belong here anymore. As I walked past the kitchen, I saw the chair where John used to sit every morning, reading the paper and sipping his coffee. He hadn't even acknowledged my absence last night. No apology, no concern, just silence. The realization stung. It was the silence that hurt the most. It wasn't the words he had said to me last night. It was the absence of them. No fight, no anger, just a cold, indifferent silence. I felt invisible. I couldn't remember the last time he had truly looked at me. I had been a shadow in his life for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. But that was about to change. I wasn't going to let this silence define me. I wasn't going to let it control me any longer. I took a deep breath and walked to the phone. I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to wait around for things to magically get better. I was going to take control. I needed to start fresh, even if it meant stepping out of the life I had known for so long. I called the real estate agent, the one I had met a few months ago when I first considered selling the house. I had been hesitant back then, unsure if I was ready to make such a drastic change, but now I knew it was the right thing to do. I wasn't going to stay in this house, not when it no longer felt like home. The agent answered on the second ring, and I told her I was ready to sell. She seemed surprised, but I could hear the excitement in her voice as she asked me when I would be available to meet. I set a time for the next day, and we hung up. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had made the first step. I had taken back some control. But as I set the phone down, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Was I doing the right thing? Was I really ready to leave this house, the house that had been my home for so long? It had been our dream, John's and mine. But now, it felt like nothing more than a prison. I walked into the living room, my eyes scanning the space I had spent so many years filling with love and memories. The pictures on the wall, the worn-out furniture, the decorations that had become a part of me, all of it felt like a lifetime ago. I had created this life, but it wasn't mine anymore. It was his. I could feel my hands trembling as I ran my fingers over the edge of the coffee table, The same table where we had spent so many nights talking, laughing, and planning for the future. I had poured everything into this life, but somewhere along the way, I had lost myself. And now, I was reclaiming who I was. I wasn't just his wife. I wasn't just a shadow in his life. I was Karen, and it was time for me to stand up for myself. I walked back to the garage, the place where I had spent the night. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was a small victory. As I sat on the floor, I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't the smile of a woman defeated. It was the smile of a woman who had found her strength. I wasn't going to let John's indifference define me. I wasn't going to let his silence dictate my worth. I was going to rebuild my life, starting now. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his validation. I had spent too many years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect partner. But now, I was going to be perfect for me. I closed my eyes, taking in a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The next few days passed in a blur, each one blurring into the next, but something inside me was shifting. The silence that had once felt suffocating now felt like a space I could fill with my own thoughts. It wasn't the quiet I feared anymore. It was the noise of my own insecurities, of all the years I had spent in a marriage that no longer made sense. I went through the motions of daily life, cooking, cleaning, taking care of things, but everything felt different. The house was the same, but I was not. Every time I passed John, I could feel the tension between us. He no longer saw me, not the way he used to. And I could feel the change in myself. It was subtle, but it was there. I wasn't the woman who would quietly accept whatever came her way anymore. I wasn't the woman who would sit and wait for love that would never come. I was beginning to understand that love had to start with me. I had spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife, perfect mother, perfect partner. But now, I realized, I had lost myself in the process. I had to find who I was without him. Without anyone. The phone call with the real estate agent had been the first step, but there were more steps to take. I needed to figure out what came next. I couldn't keep living in this house, in this life, pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. I needed to make a plan for myself, something that didn't involve him or anyone else. Just me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I couldn't keep living in this silence, in this emptiness. I had spent years thinking I was doing the right thing, but I had only been running on empty, doing everything for everyone but myself. I needed to change that. The more I thought about what I wanted, the clearer it became. I didn't want to just survive anymore. I wanted to live. I didn't want to wake up every day in a marriage that had long since died. I didn't want to live in a house that had become a tomb of broken promises. I needed to find my own place. A place that wasn't defined by what John wanted. A place where I could be myself, free from the expectations that had kept me tied down for so long. So, I started looking. I searched online for apartments, for places I could go, for places that felt like they could be mine. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, but I knew I had to. I needed to take the next step. And then one day, I found it. A small house just outside the city, away from the memories of my marriage, away from the life I had known. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The moment I saw the listing, I knew it was the place for me. I could see myself there, in that quiet little house, with nothing but my thoughts and my own company. I wasn't going to rush into anything. I wasn't going to make any hasty decisions. But this was a place I could start over, a place where I could rebuild. I knew that finding the house was just the beginning. I had to be brave enough to leave, brave enough to make a new life for myself. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could do it. I felt a glimmer of hope, something I hadn't felt in years. I called the real estate agent and made an appointment to see the house. It was time to take that first step. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt in control. The house would be mine. The life would be mine. And nothing, not even John's indifference, could take that away from me. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready. I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let fear or doubt hold me back anymore. I was going to make this happen. For the first time, I was going to live for me. The days that followed felt like a blur. I was still adjusting to the new reality I had chosen, one where I was no longer bound by the expectations of John or anyone else. The house, still filled with remnants of a life I had lived with him, felt like a place I was simply passing through. Each room seemed to echo with memories, some painful, some sweet, but all of them tinged with the realization that it was no longer mine. I spent more time outside the house, exploring the area around the little place I was considering. The house was small, but it was perfect in its simplicity. It wasn't grand or full of the lavish things John had insisted on for years, but it had something the house I had shared with him didn't: peace. I wasn't sure what peace even looked like until now, but as I walked around the small yard, I felt it. It was quiet. It was mine. As I stood there, I realized I had spent so much time in this house with John, trying to fill the silence with anything, doing anything to avoid facing the fact that we had grown apart. But now, the silence was different. It wasn't oppressive. It wasn't painful. It was something I could breathe in without feeling suffocated. I returned to the house later that evening and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. John had always sat there, his presence filling up the space in a way that was both comforting and stifling. But tonight, there was no one there. The chair was just a chair. The table was just a table. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that I didn't need him to make this place feel whole. I had always thought that our life together was what made the house a home, but I was wrong. It wasn't him. It wasn't the things we had accumulated over the years. It was me. I was the one who made it home. I had spent so many years pouring my energy into him, into our family, into this house, that I had forgotten what it meant to take care of myself. I had neglected my own needs, my own dreams, in favor of his. And now, I was finally realizing that I didn't have to keep doing that. I could focus on myself. I could build my own life, my own future, and it didn't have to include him. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. It meant letting go of everything I had known, everything I had worked for. But it also meant freedom. Real freedom. I picked up the phone and called the real estate agent again. It was time to make it official. I was going to sell the house. I was going to leave it all behind. And as I spoke with the agent, setting the wheels in motion for the sale, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was the right choice. I was doing this for me. The next few weeks were filled with appointments, paperwork, and the final steps of saying goodbye to a life I had built with John. But even as I packed up the last of our things, I didn't feel the sadness I thought I would. Instead, I felt relief. I was doing this. I was moving forward. I was leaving the past behind. The house sold quickly, much faster than I had expected, and soon I was standing in the empty living room, taking one last look around. There were no tears, no regrets. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was finally free. I didn't have a clear plan for the future yet, but that was okay. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about what came next. I was excited. I was excited for the first time in a long time to be on my own, to figure things out without anyone else's expectations weighing me down. I had made the decision to take control of my life, and nothing was going to stop me. I was no longer the woman who waited for love that never came. I was no longer the woman who stayed silent and accepted whatever was handed to her. I was Karen, and I was finally living for me. It had been a few weeks since I had moved out of the house and into the small place I had found. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The silence was different here, quieter, but not in a way that suffocated me. There were no voices echoing through the halls, no heavy footsteps of a man who had once been my husband. It was peaceful, and for the first time in years, I found that I could hear my own thoughts. I hadn't realized how much I had been drowning out just to get through the day. I had spent so much time being what everyone else needed me to be, especially John, that I had forgotten what it meant to be myself. I had no idea who I was outside of my role as his wife. But now I was learning. I had to. I spent my mornings drinking coffee in the kitchen, looking out the small window that overlooked the street. The sun would rise, casting a soft glow on the sidewalk, and for a moment, I would just watch it. It was strange to have so much time to myself, so much space to think. I had never been alone like this. I had always been surrounded by people, by John, by the house, by the constant demands of family. But now it was just me, and I was finally starting to like it. The loneliness that had once felt suffocating was now something I could embrace. I had my own pace. I had my own time, and no one could take that away from me. I thought about the last few years, about all the things I had let slide, all the things I had ignored in order to keep the peace. I had convinced myself that this was how life was supposed to be, that I had to put everyone else first, especially John. I had given up pieces of myself, small things at first, until one day, I realized that the woman I had been wasn't there anymore. I had to find her again. I started small. I enrolled in a painting class, something I had always wanted to do but had never made the time for. The first day, I felt ridiculous holding a paintbrush. It had been years since I had done anything creative. But slowly, I began to remember the feeling of creating something for myself. It wasn't perfect, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that it was mine. I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I wasn't doing it to impress John, or my family, or anyone else. I was doing it for me. The next few weeks passed, and I found myself settling into this new life. I started seeing more of my friends, the ones I had neglected over the years. I reconnected with people I had pushed away because I had been too focused on making my marriage work. I spent more time doing things I enjoyed, things that made me feel like myself again. The weight of the past slowly began to lift. I wasn't just existing anymore, I was living. One evening, I found myself sitting outside on my porch, watching the sun set over the horizon. It was a simple moment, but it felt like everything had led up to that. The air was cool, and I could hear the rustling of leaves in the trees. I took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp evening air. It felt good to breathe deeply, to feel the world around me without the constant pressure of a life that wasn't mine. I had spent so many years holding my breath, trying to keep everything together, trying to keep everyone happy. But now, for the first time, I could exhale. I could be free. And that was worth more than anything I had ever known. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, I didn't feel scared of it. I wasn't living for anyone else's approval anymore. I was living for me, and that was enough. It was a few months later when I first saw John again. I had been avoiding it, pushing the thought of facing him to the back of my mind, but eventually, I knew I couldn't keep avoiding it forever. The divorce papers had been signed, and the house had been sold. I had moved into a small, cozy apartment, and I was starting to truly feel like myself again. I had started over, and it was exactly what I needed. But there was still a part of me that wondered what it would feel like when I finally had to face him, when the person I had spent most of my life with, the person who had once been my world, walked back into it. The meeting was arranged through our lawyer. It wasn't supposed to be anything significant, just the final step of the divorce process. Still, as I stood outside the small cafe where we had agreed to meet, I felt my heart racing. It had been months since I had seen him, and yet, in that moment, everything about the past came rushing back. The moments we had shared, the times we had laughed, the good days that now felt like they belonged to another lifetime. I waited outside for a few minutes, gathering my thoughts, trying to push the nerves away. And then, I saw him. He looked the same, maybe even a little older, but it was still the man I had once known. The man I had loved. He saw me and stopped, his eyes studying me for a moment. There was no warmth in them, no recognition of the life we had shared. It was like he was seeing a stranger. I forced myself to smile as I walked toward him, but it felt like a mask, one that I had put on too many times in the past. "Karen," he said, his voice cool. "I didn't think you'd be here." I took a deep breath. I had no idea how I was supposed to respond. "I'm here, John," I said, my voice steady. "We need to get this over with." He didn't say anything right away. He just nodded and gestured for me to sit across from him. We sat there in silence. For a few moments, both of us avoiding each other's gaze. It felt like we were two strangers, two people who had never shared a life together. The silence was thick, heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just final. "How have you been?" he asked after a while, his voice softening a bit. I could hear the hint of something in his tone, maybe regret, maybe guilt, but I couldn't be sure. "I'm fine," I replied. "I've been good." The words were true, but they didn't feel true. I wasn't fine. I wasn't good. But I couldn't say that to him. Not anymore. Not after everything. We spent the next few minutes going over the final details of the divorce. It was all business, nothing personal. It was as if the years we had spent together had been erased, as if all the love we had once shared was just a distant memory. When it was over, when everything had been settled, I stood up to leave. "Karen," he said just as I turned to walk away. I paused but didn't turn around. "What?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion I didn't want to show. "I'm sorry," he said, his words hanging in the air between us. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how to. I hadn't expected an apology, not after everything that had happened, not after the way he had treated me. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I pushed it back. I didn't want to deal with that. Not now. "Goodbye, John," I said, my voice calm and final. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I walked out of the cafe, feeling the weight of the past lift off my shoulders. It was over. The final chapter had been written, and I was free. But as I walked away, I realized something. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't sad. I had been all of those things, but not anymore. I had let go. I had moved on. And that was the most powerful thing I could have done for myself. I wasn't the woman I used to be. I wasn't the woman who would stay silent, who would put up with being mistreated. I was stronger now. I had learned to stand up for myself, to be my own person. I wasn't waiting for anyone else to save me anymore. I was saving myself. The days after my meeting with John felt strangely quiet. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long, the weight of carrying this unresolved life, had finally lifted. I had closed that chapter, and for the first time in years, I felt the freedom to breathe, to think, to truly live for myself. I had spent so many years thinking about what I had lost, about the relationship that had crumbled, but now, I realized that what I had gained was so much more. I wasn't living in the past anymore. I wasn't defined by the woman I had been in my marriage. I was starting to understand who I really was, and that felt like a gift I had given myself. My apartment had become a sanctuary, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts without the constant pressure of a life I didn't want. Every day, I worked on myself, doing things I had long ignored, reading books I'd always wanted to read, learning new skills, and even taking time to simply sit and think. I began to rediscover passions I had forgotten about, passions that had been buried beneath the weight of my responsibilities as a wife and mother. One day, I decided to take a trip just to get away and clear my mind. I had always wanted to visit the coast, to see the ocean, and for the first time, I decided to make it happen. The trip wasn't planned for any special reason. It wasn't some grand gesture of rebellion or independence. It was simply something I had always wanted to do, something I had always put off for everyone else. But now, there was no one to put first but me. I spent a weekend on the coast, walking along the beach, feeling the cool ocean breeze on my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I wasn't thinking about John or the years I had spent trying to make a broken marriage work. I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I was gaining, about the freedom I had found in choosing my own path. I took long walks, found quiet spots to sit and think, and let the sound of the waves soothe my mind. It was simple, but it was perfect. On the way back home, I felt a sense of renewal, like I was coming back to myself, but this time with a new perspective. I wasn't the same woman who had left that apartment weeks ago. I had grown. I had learned. And most importantly, I had healed. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I wasn't afraid of being on my own. I had spent so many years believing that my worth was tied to the love and approval of others, especially John, but now I knew better. My worth was my own, and I didn't need anyone else to validate that. I was ready to step into the future, to embrace whatever it had in store for me. It wasn't about getting back at John or proving anything to anyone. It was about finally choosing myself, something I had never done before. And as I stood on the beach, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that I had found something more valuable than anything I had ever hoped for: my freedom. It wasn't about escaping from my past. It was about embracing my future. I had let go of what no longer served me, and now I was ready to create something new, something just for me. Months passed, and with each one, I felt myself growing stronger, more confident in who I was becoming. I had found a rhythm in my new life, something I hadn't realized I was missing until it was mine again. I woke up every day with a sense of purpose, and it felt natural. The world around me, which had once seemed so heavy, now felt lighter, as though the burden I had carried for so long had finally been lifted. I spent my mornings taking long walks, enjoying the quiet moments of solitude that had become my sanctuary. The small apartment I had moved into was simple, but it felt like home. It was my space, and it was the first time in a long time that I had felt truly at peace. I no longer worried about what John thought or what he might say. I was no longer waiting for his approval or validation. I had finally learned to approve of myself. One evening, I was sitting on the couch, sipping tea, when I heard a knock at the door. It was unexpected, and for a moment, I wondered if it might be John. I hadn't spoken to him since our last meeting, and I wasn't sure what I would say if I saw him again. But when I opened the door, it wasn't John. It was Helen, one of my old friends from years ago. She had been there for me through so much, and we had lost touch over the years, but now she was standing on my doorstep with a warm smile. "I thought I'd stop by," she said, holding a bag of homemade cookies. I invited her in, and we spent the evening catching up, laughing about old times, and sharing stories. It felt so good to have someone around again, someone who understood me, who didn't see me through the lens of my past mistakes or the weight of my old life. As we talked, Helen noticed the changes in me. "You look different," she said. "You look happy." I smiled, knowing that she was right. "I am," I said. "For the first time in a long time, I truly am." That night, as I sat in my apartment, the warmth of Helen's visit still lingering, I realized just how far I had come. I had spent so many years thinking I needed someone else to complete me, to make me whole. But now I understood that I was already complete. I had always been complete. I just needed to find that strength within myself. And I had. I had walked away from a life that wasn't serving me, from a man who had stopped seeing me for who I was, and I had created a life for myself. A life where I was the center, where my happiness didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I had learned to live for me, and that was the greatest gift I could have ever given myself. I wasn't looking for love or validation from anyone else. I had found it within myself. As I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, the future felt open, full of possibility. I didn't know exactly what was coming, but I knew I was ready for it. I was ready for whatever came next, because I had learned to trust myself. I had learned that I could make it on my own, and I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was complete, and that was enough.